Hey y'all, Tiz again, reading from Mutual Aid, Building Solidarity During This Crisis and the Next by Dean Spade. And 3 key elements of mutual aid. 1. Mutual aid projects work to meet survival needs and build shared understanding about why people do not have what they need. Mutual aid projects expose the reality that people do not have what they need and propose that we can address this injustice together. The most famous example in the United States is the Black Panther Party survival programs, which ran throughout the 1960s and 1970s, including a free breakfast program, free ambulance program, free medical clinics, a service offering rides to elderly people doing errands, and a school aimed at providing a rigorous liberation curriculum to children. The Black Panther programs welcomed people into the liberation struggle by creating spaces where they could meet basic needs and build a shared analysis about the conditions they were facing. Instead of feeling ashamed about not being able to feed their kids in a culture that blames poor people, especially poor Black people, for their poverty, people attending the Panthers Free Breakfast program got food and a chance to build shared analysis about Black poverty. It broke stigma and isolation, met material needs, and got people fired up to work together for change. Recognizing the program's success, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover famously wrote in a 1969 memo sent to all field offices that the BCP, Breakfast for Children program, represents the best and most influential activity going on for the BPP, Black Panther Party, and as such is potentially the greatest threat to efforts by authorities to neutralize BPP and destroy what it stands for. The night before the Chicago program was supposed to open, police broke into the church that was hosting it and urinated on all of the food for children. Excellent. The government's attacks on the Black Panther Party are evidence of mutual aid's power, as is the government's co-option of the program. In the early 1970s, the U.S. Department of Agriculture expanded its federal free breakfast program, built on a charity, not a liberation model, that still feeds millions of children today. The Black Panthers provided a striking vision of liberation, asserting that Black people had to defend themselves against a violent and racist government, and that they could organize to give each other what a racist society withheld. During that same period, the Young Lords Party undertook similar and related mutual aid projects in their work towards Puerto Rican liberation. The Young Lords brought people into the movement by starting with the everyday needs of Puerto Ricans in impoverished communities. They protested the lack of garbage pickups in Puerto Rican neighborhoods, hijacked a city mobile X-ray truck to bring greater tuberculosis testing to Puerto Rican communities, took over part of a hospital to provide health care, and provided food and youth programs for Puerto Rican communities. Their vision for decolonizing Puerto Rico and liberating Puerto Ricans in the United States from racism, poverty, and police terror was put into practice through mutual aid. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, many overlapping movements undertook mutual aid efforts, such as feminist health clinics and activist-run abortion providers, emerging volunteer-run gay health clinics, child care collectives, tenants unions, and community food projects. Although this moment is an important reference point for the contemporary left, mutual aid didn't start in the 1960s, but it is an ongoing feature of movements seeking transformative change. Clea Benally, project coordinator at Indigenous Media Action, argues that mutual aid is an unbroken tradition among Indigenous people across many cycles of colonialism, maintained through traditional teachings that contemporary Indigenous mutual aid projects are working to restore and amplify. Settlers have long worked to undermine Indigenous people's self-sustaining practices by first destroying food systems and then forcing dependency on rations given at forts and missions, and now by settler nonprofits. Indigenous mutual aid efforts are both a matter of survival and a powerful form of resistance to forced independence on settler systems. The long tradition of mutual aid societies and other forms of self-help in Black communities, which as early as the 1780s sought to pool resources to provide health and life insurance, care for the sick, aid for burials, support for widows and orphans, and public education efforts, and another important example. These efforts have addressed Black exclusion from white infrastructures by creating Black alternatives, Long traditions of mutual aid are also visible in working class communities that have long supported workers on strike so they could pay rent and buy food while confronting their bosses. Perhaps most of all, the pervasive presence of mutual aid during sudden disasters of all kinds, storms, floods, fires, and earthquakes, demonstrates how people come together to care for each other and share resources, when inevitably the government is not there to help, offers relief that does not reach the most vulnerable people, and deploys law enforcement against displaced disaster survivors. Mutual aid is a powerful force.